Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dongfang Hour China Aerospace and Space News Roundup. This for the week of the 23rd to 29th of November 2020. I'm Blaine Curcio, joined as always by my co-host Jean Deville. This week we will bring you updates on a China Satcom satellite order, the US administration blacklisting a number of Chinese companies with ties to the military, a liquid methalox engine, news of the 5G World Congress in Guangzhou. But first, Jean will give us an update on China's recent Chang'e 5 lunar mission.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome you aboard the Dongfang Hour. Please make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened. Thank you.
女士们、先生们，预计空中飞行时间2小时15分钟，我们预计在当地时间下午6点25分左右到达。
Jean, take it away with Chang'e 5.
Absolutely, Blaine. So let's start with the big news of the past week, which was basically that we witnessed together the launch of the Chang'e 5 lunar sample return mission that took place at Wenchang Launch Center. That's in the island of Hainan in southern China, and that was on Tuesday, the 24th of November, early morning Chinese time. The launch was a success, which makes it a first in the history of China, the first lunar sample return mission. And it is also globally a first since the last lunar sample return mission that goes all the way back to 1976. That was the Lunar 24 sample return mission of the Soviet Union. So as mentioned, the launch went well, and it took place on board a Long March 5, which is the heavy lift launch vehicle of China. And the Chang'e 5 spacecraft was put on a trajectory towards the moon. And so after a number of maneuvers, it managed to insert itself into lunar orbit just yesterday. It is today in an elliptic orbit around the moon. And quick heads up on what's going to happen in the next few days. We will have a few extra maneuvers. So the spacecraft basically can enter the ideal lunar orbit in order to land in the planned landing site, which is a volcanic formation called Mons Rumker, I believe, in an area of the moon called the Ocean of Storms, which is a very cool name. And what will happen next is the lander and the ascent module, they detach, they land on the moon. And at that point, this is when the drilling and the sample collection takes place. The sample is put onto the ascent module. The ascent module takes off, leaves the lander on the moon, and performs an automatic docking with the orbiter that remained in orbit. Then the sample is put into the return capsule, and the ascent module separates. It is no longer required. The orbiter goes back on an Earth-Moon trajectory, and in the vicinity of the Earth, the return capsule then separates and re-enters the atmosphere and lands in Inner Mongolia. So that's a very simplified version of what's going to happen. I hope I didn't make too many viewers cringe out there when I said that. But basically, it's also interesting to know that we went from an 8.2 tons spacecraft at liftoff from Earth, and we will be getting, hopefully, the samples, which are only 2 kilograms. So it's crazy when you think how much effort is required to just get 2 kilograms of moon samples back onto the Earth. And maybe just a quick point to wrap this up on Chang'e 5. What I wanted to add also is that it's not just a repeat mission of Lunar 24 or the other lunar missions. It is a more sophisticated mission with technology that you'd expect in 2020. There was, so typically, for example, Chang'e 5 is 8.2 tons at liftoff, and you compare that to Lunar 24, which was 5 to 6 tons, I believe. So that's a lot of extra propellant, the possibility to do a lot of high precision maneuvers to land anywhere on the moon, whereas the lunar missions were a bit more limited regarding the areas where it could land, I believe. There's also more sophisticated equipment and instruments regarding, where to land, being able to analyze and avoid obstacles and just decide which is the best area once the lander has landed, which is the best place to drill, and, just collect the samples. So yeah, fingers crossed that this goes well. So Blaine, do you have any thoughts? Did you watch the launch? It's probably a bit early in Hong Kong.
I did not watch the launch, but a couple of points to add. So I guess your 8.2 tons to get 2 kilograms of lunar samples is a good point, but I guess maybe an even larger number is the sort of 1.8 million pounds that is the Long March 5 that was also used to get that 8.2 ton spacecraft into orbit, just to get the 2 kilograms of lunar samples. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah. The other thing that I think was interesting is, as you mentioned, the launch took place from Hainan, from Wenchang Launch Center on this tropical island in the southern part of China. And over the last few years, there have been a few launches from Hainan. It's always the Long March 5, or is there another Long March that launched, the Long March 8 also from Hainan, or no? Which, only the 5?
The 7.
7, that's, yeah. But anyway, this is becoming kind of a space industry thing in China, that you have people making the pilgrimage down to Hainan during launches. And there was this really epic photo taken during the launch of just literally hundreds of people on this beach that was quite far. I mean, you could see the launch site way in the distance. And everyone had their phones up, and some people were wearing masks, and it looked like some people were not. And it was literally just hundreds of people out there on the beach. And we had shared this photo on the Dongfang Hour Twitter account. And we had a lot of people not a lot, but a handful of people in Western countries kind of resharing it and saying, yeah, over in this part of the world, we're all on lockdown, and things are just completely, upside down. And meanwhile, on the other side of the world, they're just launching rockets to the moon and having big parties outside with a bunch of other people. So, just a really crazy, interesting contrast, I guess. And certainly a pretty cool launch.
And I think on that, I was very impressed also by the coverage that there was of this event. From the Chinese side, there was a live coverage. There was a very interesting live coverage and interviews on the CGTN, which is the English-speaking Chinese media. And there was also, impressively, some good coverage from other space YouTubers, such as Everyday Astronaut, which is a YouTuber I quite like. There's also, on the French side, there's Rêve d'Espace, Space Kiwi. They also did a live coverage. So that was really great, and hopefully they will continue to do that, because sometimes it's quite irregular in terms of if there is live coverage or not of such an important launch. So it's good job on China for that.
And some pretty epic 4K 120 frames per second Bilibili videos that were posted of just really close up of the engines as the rocket is taking off, and just really pretty cool. I guess they're getting better at marketing and kind of branding and producing good content, and it's been cool to watch.
Maybe we should do a live coverage someday for the next big event like that.
Well, yeah, we got the invite from Land Space to go to the DQ2 launch, so we got to do that. Yeah, we'll have to do a live episode from there. So, anything else on Chang'e 5, or are we good to go on to the next story of the week?
All good.
Yep, so next story of the week, we have China Satcom, which, according to an article from Satellite World Weixingjie, which is a quite well-known kind of non-state affiliated media source in the space industry in China, China Satcom has ordered 5 satellites that will be launched between 2021 and 2023 into geostationary orbit. These are all communication satellites. And a couple of things about the article that were interesting. So I guess initially the headline mentions that they're kind of television broadcast satellites, several of them. So this would be ChinaSat 6D and 6E, which respectively are going to be replacements for 6A and 6B, that are sort of C and KU band standard wide beam satellites. And these are basically just going to be continuing to do linear TV broadcasts, it sounds like, from their launch in, say, 2022 until 2037, when they would be coming out of orbit, which is really, I don't know how much linear TV there's going to be in 2037, but I suppose ChinaSat 6D and 6E will be there, and according to the headline of this article, that is their purpose, is broadcast satellites. The other satellites that were ordered were ChinaSat 9B, which is a replacement for 9A, and then a couple of high-throughput satellites, ChinaSat 26 and ChinaSat 19. So these 5 satellites, the total cost is 3.9 billion RMB. It's about 600 million US dollars. This is all effectively a transfer pricing exercise insofar as China Satcom is a subsidiary of CASIC, and then the satellites are being purchased from CAST, which is another subsidiary of CASIC. And so there's really, it's always fun to watch the money go from one pocket into the other pocket. But I guess the interesting points that I would highlight about these satellites would be, none of them appear to be the DFH-5 satellite bus. So CAST, their largest geostationary communication satellite bus at the moment that they produce regularly is the DFH-4, and there's a newer version, the DFH-4E, so the 4 enhanced, I think, would be, And so the DFH-4 has been a quite solid workhorse satellite bus over a rather long period of time. I don't know, it should be high single-digit number of years that they've been using the 4 as their workhorse. The 5, they had attempted to launch the Shijian 18 satellite in 2017. That was the first DFH-5 bus, and that launch failed. So it seems that that CAST is pushing the DFH-5 project a little bit to the right, as it were. And it's always hard to speculate as to why that is, but my personal feeling is that right now we're seeing a lot of innovation and a lot of uncertainty in this sort of Satcom part of the market on the manufacturing side. So you're seeing companies like Viasat that are developing like these very, very big 1 terabit per second geostationary satellites, which is literally like 30 or 40 times larger than what CAST is probably capable of producing now, or maybe 20 times larger. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have these companies like Astranis or Saturn Satellite Networks that are building what are called small geos. So this would be like a 3 or 5 or 700 kilogram geostationary satellite as compared to, say, a 5,000 kilogram one, which is sort of the standard. And these small geos would be like 10 or 20 or 30 gigabits per second. So you would have a satellite that is comparable in throughput to, say, a ChinaSat 26 or like a ChinaSat 16 for sure. But that is maybe 1/10 or 1/20th of the mass. So you have a lot of innovation going on, primarily from Western, like American, like Viasat and Saturn and Astranis, and then you have, of course, Starlink and LEO, that are all doing a lot of things in terms of developing sort of better communication satellites. So it could be that that CAST has kind of seen that the DFH-5 is not, in its current iteration, such a huge step up. It's sort of an iteration of the DFH-4, and so I would imagine it's possible that they are putting more resources into making kind of a more revolutionary move forward in terms of their geostationary communication satellite capabilities. But again, that's speculation. So yeah, I guess just to summarize, we have 5 satellites ordered by China Satcom. 3 of them are replacement satellites for existing ones. 2 of them are new HTS satellites that are going to be probably, it looks like, covering like quite wide area from a little bit of the western US all the way across the Pacific, across China, and then over towards the Middle East. That based on a coverage map that was published in the China Satcom presentation earlier this week that we can probably post on the episode as well. But John, anything from you on the 5 China Satcom satellites that were ordered for 3.9 billion RMB?
Yeah, and so specifically on the 26 and 19, if they are DFH-4E satellites, satellite buses, and this is something that you mentioned when we discussed this point earlier, the DFH-5 is a very large satellite bus, and the fact that these 2 satellites very likely will be DFH-4E satellite buses probably means that perhaps there isn't that much demand currently for K and KU band capacity to justify, launching such large satellites over China and the Asia Pacific region. And just reminds me that last week there was an airline, Chengdu Airlines, that a Chinese airline that equipped itself with wireless IFE. And once again, it was wireless IFE without the connectivity component. So we definitely see that a lot of the downstream users of this broadband connectivity are quite slow to equip their fleet with, the hardware that would enable the use of, satellite connectivity. So that could be another reason, as well as Long March 5 as well, because DFH-5 launches on Long March 5. It's too big to launch on the, the current geostationary launch vehicle workhorse, which is the 3B. So Long March 5 now has proven to be a reliable rocket. It has launched successfully at the end of last year and this year, but it's probably not as straightforward as launching a 3B, which has really 20 years of successful history.
And they have other things for which they need the Long March 5, such as the Chang'e 5 mission and other. Well, not anymore, I guess, but yeah, there's a lot of big things going on. Chinese Large Modular Space Station, I guess, is next. That'll be fun to watch. So, on to the administration of the U.S. blacklisting some companies. Would you like to take us there, Jean? Give us your neutral perspective, given your third party.
Absolutely. It's also a way to put a little aviation in the weekly news update. So, according to a piece by Reuters last week, the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, plans to. So it's not done yet, but apparently the rumors are that it plans to blacklist 89 companies, Chinese companies that are quote unquote have military ties. And out of these 89 companies, we have a significant number of them that have that are strongly involved in the commercial aviation industry. And we have companies such as COMAC, which is Commercial Aviation of China, and which is based in Shanghai, and that manufactures the single-aisle C919 commercial airliner. And we also have companies like AVIC, which are a huge aviation manufacturing conglomerate with institutes all around the country. And so the question really is, what does this mean if this blacklist actually becomes effective? And it would probably mean that a lot of the all U.S. aviation manufacturers and parts manufacturers would have to request specific authorizations from the Department of State to get the authorization to export components to the blacklisted Chinese companies. And another question is, what would be the consequence? And my opinion on that one is that it would be devastating, and on both sides. So if we first take a U.S. point of view, on the U.S. side, definitely the blow would be devastating because the Chinese commercial aviation market is no small market today. It represents about 20% of the global commercial aviation industry, and that is bound to grow in the coming years. It will probably overtake the U.S. somewhere in the 2030s. And Boeing is doing very well in China, just selling a lot of aircraft, and a lot of U.S. Parts manufacturers also doing quite well in China. And now if we take the Chinese, see things on the Chinese side now, it would also be devastating for the manufacturing industry there, and probably even more so than for the U.S. because, and this is an article that I wrote in China Aerospace blog about 2 years ago, the C919, for example, the Chinese single-aisle aircraft relies very much on foreign technology and on U.S. technology, and like on companies like Honeywell, General Electric, Collins Aerospace. All these companies would probably have to halt their cooperation with COMAC, and this would undoubtedly put a full stop to the C919, I'd say, for 5 and possibly 10 years. So it's honestly, it's a double-edged sword, and there's a parallel to be done with the space industry in the late 90s between the US and China. It moved suddenly from what was a rather cooperative relationship, although reluctant from the US side, to really a full-fledged decoupling. And the question is, could this happen for the aviation market? And there are similarities between space and aviation. There are also differences. In aviation, it's a much more international market. It's more commercial. It's slightly less political relatively. And there's also the notion of certification in aviation that you don't have in space. So I think there could be a lot of damage on both sides. And on the Chinese internet, a lot of Chinese netizens were saying, is this really the plan that the U.S. administration has, or is it more of a ploy to put pressure on the CAAC, the Civil Aviation Authorities of China, which is the Chinese version of the FAA, to reauthorize the Boeing 737 MAX to retake the skies? This is something that the FAA did already a couple weeks back. So that could also be a political move. A lot of stuff happening in the aviation sector. On that side in China.
And I think the other interesting thing to see about this will be, it reminds me of an article written, I think, last month on Bloomberg about AVIC and their footprint in the U.S., because AVIC has a lot of investments in the United States, and they have some like wholly owned subsidiaries, and then some that are joint ventures. And I'm just looking at this map here that I sent across to you a moment ago on WeChat, and you have like a company like, it's called Cirrus Aircraft in Minnesota that seems to do private jets, and I don't know what part of private jets, but they have the Next Tier Automotive Group that does steering systems in Michigan. And you got about 8 or 10 companies here that are AVIC subsidiaries or JVs in the U.S. So these are like American jobs that may now be in the crosshairs to some extent, in the sense that it's going to be more difficult, it seems like, for AVIC to be doing things with the U.S. at all, I think. So we can post that article as well. It seems like... I think you're probably right that this is, although it's always hard to know, but I think, it's a negotiating tactic, maybe. We'll see. But I don't know. It's certainly a strange time for U.S.-China relations.
Definitely.
So moving on to the CASIC liquid methane engine. So this is it's kind of a mysterious update. So CASIC and X-Space released a couple of photos of a the Mingfeng liquid methalox engine from earlier this week. So this is an engine being developed seemingly by X-Base. And this week they completed a systems level hot test, with the test verifying the integrity of the engine system, the thrust chamber, combustor, turbopump, valve, and the final assembly. And it's kind of strange because up to this point, I had never heard of CASIC developing a liquid methalox engine. I've never heard of this Mingfeng engine. All of X-Base's current, like the Guangzhou 1A certainly, and the Guangzhou 11 certainly, and are using solid propulsion engines. And Guangzhou 21, as far as I know, is also planning to be a solid fuel engine. So yeah, this was a little bit of a random update that CASIC is apparently developing a liquid methalox engine, but apparently their Mingfeng engine has now completed a systems level hot test. I suppose probably they would expect to be selling this engine to other companies. There was no information available on, as far as I know, there was no information available on like any of the specifics of like what was the thrust or what was the diameter, or what was any of the dimensions or anything. Jean, anything from your side on this kind of mysterious engine update from CASIC, from X-Base?
I think that, yeah, either they would be selling it to one of the other companies that are not making their own liquid propulsion engines, or if they're using it for themselves, that would definitely be a major shift in their strategy. I mean, even just a month or two ago at CCAF, they were justifying the business case for solid rockets and how there was really a market for solid propulsion, and so yeah, that would just be a big change compared to what they said just 1 or 2 months ago.
Yeah, and I mean, just one last point to kind of close the loop here. I mean, I did a search around Baidu in Chinese for Mingfeng engine or Mingfeng liquid methalox engine or Mingfeng CASIC, some various kind of combinations of these phrases, and like literally nothing. I mean, except for this article from a couple of days ago that was saying, oh yeah, we've done the systems level test. So yeah, it's I don't know. You never know. It's just as we're talking about a new solid rocket company every week or so, we have CASIC now bucking the trend, coming at us with the liquid methalox. That's nice. So the last point of news on the week, so we have the World 5G convention opening in Guangzhou, and I came across this news because there was an article written about a speech given by the chief designer of the Beidou third generation constellation, Yang Changfeng, and Mr. Yang was noting that basically, he was talking about how all of the core components for the Beidou third generation constellation are domestically manufactured, so it's 100% Chinese manufactured. And then the relationship to 5G, he was saying that because this 5G world is going to be relying on highly precise and current location data, there's going to need to be, the Beidou third generation, more precise satellite navigation system. And there was some sort of discussion on some of the standard talking points about trying to have Beidou-compatible chipsets in all smartphones in China. He mentioned that at the moment, 80% of phones in China are equipped with Beidou 3 chipsets. And an interesting, seems like an interesting conference. I mean, I've seen, there's a really, really good blog I came across recently called Analysis Branch. It's run by this guy called Dave Bernstein. He talks about 5G in very much detail. And he's written for quite some time about the fact that China is not only the leader in 5G in terms of like network rollout, but also the leader in 5G in terms of smartphone sales, because it's just become really, really cheap. You have like 8 or 10 smartphone companies that are all competing for this market, and they've now gotten to the point where for like $200 or $250 you can get like a reasonably fine 5G compatible phone. That being said, he also points out correctly that there is still no real sort of killer app for 5G. Like everyone has these 5G phones, but what are they doing with them that they could not be doing on like an LTE connection? So it's an interesting. The 5G buzz phrase continues to live on, and I don't think we're nearly at the end of that. I think this is going to be probably the word of 2021. But yeah, Jean, anything from your side on the 5G conference, the World 5G convention in Guangzhou this week?
Not really. You covered it pretty well. I just when you went through that, reminds me of an article I read last week. I think it was in GNSS Today or another sat-nav focused magazine discussing how Beidou outside of China was gaining market share. So I'll probably link that somewhere in the show notes. I don't remember the figures, but yeah, it's worth mentioning that Beidou is also growing not just in China, but also outside of China.
Makes sense. They have a lot of, well, not a lot. They have a handful of like Beidou overseas research and development type centers in places like Thailand and I think also Tunisia, perhaps. So it's going to be there's going to be a lot more Beidou where that came from, I suppose. Okay, so anything else, John, from your side for this week? Or
I'm all good.
Okay, then. Good to go. Well, thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Dongfang Hour China Aerospace and Space News Roundup. I'm Blaine Curcio, joined as always by Jean Deville, and thank you for listening. We will see you next week.
Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.